Hello my sweet friends, welcome back. We are here with another monthly reading wrap up. Please forgive me, I'm a bit sick at the moment. I've just got a bit of a cold, nothing serious, but I feel like I just don't sound like myself completely and I don't have as much energy as I normally do, but I wanted to film this video for you guys and this is the best I felt in a few days, so I'm just gonna take the chance and we'll just do the best we can. I had such a great reading month this month. All of the books that I read this month were from my physical TBR, which is fantastic because we are obviously always trying to tackle the TBR. I also read 7 of the 8 books that I had on my April TBR, which is probably the most successful I've been in reading my monthly TBR for quite a while now. I honestly think if I'd had a couple extra days, I would have read the last book on my TBR. I just simply ran out of time. Alas, we are still on our journey to finish one of our monthly TBRs. I think I've done it like once ever. But I read 16 books total. I'll put the genre breakdown on the screen for you guys if that's of interest to you, and let's just jump straight into it. Starting off, we have The Iron King by Julie Kagawa. This is the first book in the Iron Fae, which is a YA fantasy series. I picked this book up in the bookstore one day. I hadn't heard any reviews about it. I just picked it up, I read the back and I was like, that sounds super interesting. And I was really excited for it, but unfortunately when I read it, I was a little bit disappointed. This was like a 2.5 star rating for me, I think. I just feel like it was a little bit too YA for me, which is not the book's fault. Like, it is YA and it is aimed at a younger audience, and usually I really love YA, but this was just too young for me, and it was just so similar to so many other books that I had read that it just felt like it was doing nothing new for me personally. I don't think I liked it enough to continue the series, but yeah, it was just very meh to me. I also struggled because a lot of this book felt very repetitive. It was just like our main character getting into a dangerous situation in this fairy world and her trying to get out of it, and as soon as she got out of it, she would get into another dangerous situation and have to try and get out of it, and it just felt like it was the same scene over and over with a slightly different environment and maybe a different character. So it just didn't do anything for me. So 2.5 stars for this one, unfortunately, but again, if I'd read it when I was younger, probably would have loved it. Then I picked up The Paper Princess by Erin Watt. This was such an interesting experience. This book was so bad that it was kind of good. It is very like Wattpad-y. It is very like something I would have read on Tumblr in 2015. It was very entertaining, but I wouldn't say it was good. Do you know what I mean? This book follows a girl who is just kind of like struggling to make ends meet, and then a man approaches her and basically says, I want you to come live with me. I'm going to become your legal guardian. And that man is extremely wealthy, and he also has 5 sons. So this girl goes to live with this man and his 5 sons, who are all roughly around her age, and it is a romance with one of the sons. Bit of a love triangle situation. It was it was just like, I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't. But if you want just something that's just pure entertainment, then like, yeah, go for it. But if you want anything of substance, I wouldn't recommend it. I know that this is a series and I have absolutely no desire to continue the series, but it was a laugh. You know, it was fun, but it was just nothing more than that to me personally. Again, I would have ate this up when I was like 16, I think. I think I would have thought this was like the epitome of romance, but reading it now, it's just not my vibe. It's just not the books I personally like to read. It was very much like, I'm not like other girls. It was very much like bad boy and he has an attitude and he doesn't like anyone but he likes me, but like not in like an actually romantic way, just in a bit of a cringy way. But like I said, very entertaining. Next, I picked up The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. This is a reread for me. I read this one last year, but I wanted to reread it before I went into the second book in this duology that just recently came out. I am yet to pick up the second book. I need to do it soon. But if you don't know, this is the start of a duology that is a spin-off series from the original Folk of the Air trilogy, which is like The Cruel Prince, that little series. I love The Cruel Prince. I love the world. I love the characters. I loved the storyline. It was actually my first fantasy book that I read as an adult, and I just absolutely adore that series. It has just a piece of my heart. So obviously I was super excited when Holly Black said she was coming out with a spin-off series, and it is good, but it just doesn't compare to the original series to me. trilogy. This book follows Oak and Ren, and Oak is the little brother of one of the main characters in The Cruel Prince, and Ren and Oak have like a childhood friendship kind of connection. Then they lose contact and then they reconnect in this book. So this book starts 8 years after the Cruel Prince trilogy finishes, and you are following Ren, who is a bit of an outcast. She is kind of like struggling to survive really, and then Oak kind of shows up and takes her on a bit of a quest, I guess. And I just don't think I'm completely obsessed with books where like the main storyline is like them on a quest, like them traveling to somewhere to do something. Like if it mostly takes place on a journey, like them going from one place to another, like if that is the main storyline, I just don't know why, but it's not super interesting to me. And that's what this book felt like to me. It was just like they were on a horse for a long time, and I don't really remember that much. Even after reading it a second time, I'm like, I still don't even remember that much about it. I gave it 3.5 stars because I still really enjoyed it, but it's just definitely not a favorite for me. I also read Flower Heart this month, and this was so good. This is YA fantasy. I would describe it as like a cozy fantasy because it's definitely not like super high stakes, and it is just really sweet and really lovely. But it follows a girl whose father is sick and she has some magic, but her magic is really hard for her to control. And no matter how hard she tries, no matter who she gets to mentor her and teach her, she can't seem to grasp her magic and control it. And the magic like council basically shows up and is like, we are gonna have to take your magic away from you if you can't learn to control it. And she is like, wait, my dad is sick and the only chance I have to heal him is by using magic. Like, please can you give me one more chance, one more mentor to see if I can finally get this magic under control. And they kind of go, okay, you can have one more chance. And she is assigned a new mentor who also just happens to be her childhood best friend, who she has lost contact with as a teenager, but they obviously are reconnected because of this situation, and he is now her teacher, and there's a bit of a romance. It's just a really sweet story. I gave this one 4 stars, and I definitely recommend it if you like cozy fantasies. Then I read Maybe Meant to Be, and I didn't love this one. I just didn't connect with the storyline, didn't connect with the characters, just like didn't care for anything in this book. And if you just don't connect with the book, it's pretty hard to give it a high rating. So I think this was like 2 stars from me. In this book, you are following 2 characters and everyone thinks that they should be together. It's like this guy and this girl, and they have this platonic friendship, but everyone is like, they're gonna end up together, they're gonna end up together. But in this book, you actually get to watch them fall in love with other people. You're following 2 different love stories between these characters, but it just wasn't for me, and that's okay. This month, I also read an entire trilogy. This is the Bride of the Shadow King trilogy by Sylvia Mercedes. I picked up the first book in Dimmicks, I think a little over a month ago. I was just walking around picking up random books, reading the backs of them, and this one just really stood out to me, and so I bought it and I took it home, and this month I picked it up and it was so good. The premise of this one is that there is this arranged marriage between 2 kingdoms. So one of the king's daughters in this one kingdom is set up to marry the Shadow King, and that's going to create like harmony between these 2 kingdoms, and there's a bit of a deal situation going on. The eldest daughter of the king should probably be the one who is like technically supposed to marry the Shadow King, but she has this chronic illness, and so because of that, she's not the one who is planned to marry him, and instead it is her younger sister. So the Shadow King shows up to this kingdom to marry this like middle sister, but there just so happens to be this like chemistry and this connection between the older sister and the Shadow King, but obviously that is not who he is like arranged to marry. So it just kind of follows that storyline. It obviously goes on much further than that, but I just really enjoyed it. There's a bit of betrayal, there's obviously this romance, it's dual POV, a lot of like little twists and turns, I guess, and this was just exactly what I was in the mood for at the time. So later in the month I picked up Vow of the Shadow King, and I enjoyed this one, but definitely not as much as the first one. And I also ended up reading the third one, and again, I enjoyed this, but definitely not as much as the first one. I will say, when I picked up the first book, it was just exactly what I wanted to read. I was completely in the mood for it, and I don't think I was as much in the mood for this type of book when I picked up the second and third book. I also think this series probably could have been a duology. I felt like the second book kind of just dragged on a little bit, and I just like don't even remember that much that happened in the second second book, and it felt like in this series the author was kind of like, wait, the couple is ready to end up together, but I want this to be a trilogy, so I've got to make it like dragged out somehow so that they don't end up together yet. And I don't know, it just was like they should be together by this point. Why are they not together? You've just placed some roadblocks in the way so that they can't end up together, which I was just a bit like, a bit unnecessary. I do think the plot in the third book was really good, and there were some things that happened that I was like, that was a really good twist and that was a really good like little plot point. But again, I just feel like this could have been a duology. And I also think the third book was so much like less romance heavy and so much more plot heavy, and it was just a bit random in this series that felt like it was so romance heavy up until that point. The first book was 4 stars, and then I think probably 3.5 stars for both of the second and third book. So I think it's still worth the read, definitely. And I think if I'd maybe read these books when I was more in the mood for them, I would have enjoyed them more. I also read this book at the end of the month after reading 2 5 stars in a row, and I think that also kind of impacted my rating on it because I was a bit slumpy after reading 2 5 stars in a row. So I don't know, if I'd read them at different times, would I have thought differently? Maybe, but I still think they're worth reading, especially the first book. I thought it was really good, but they just weren't like my favorite fantasy series that I've ever read, you know? Next up we have One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I loved this. This was a 4.5 star read for me. This is an adult gothic fantasy, and I just loved everything about this. Like, I loved the way the story was set up. I loved the way the magic worked. I loved the atmosphere. I just thought it was really, really well done. I feel like this book is a little bit hard to explain because there are a few different elements of it. Like, there is this mist element that is like overtaking the city, and there's like these cards element that have powers. So if you have the card, you have that power. There's also the romance element of it. There's the politics side of it. Like, there's a lot going on in this book, and it's a little bit hard to just like give you a very simple synopsis. I will just say I really recommend it. If you like fantasy books, I think this is definitely worth checking out, and I'm really excited to pick up the second book because I haven't done that yet. Finally, I picked up the Song of Achilles. If you watched my reading books I've been avoiding vlog, you will see that I read both of these 2 books, which have been on my TBR for years at this point, and I am so happy that I finally got them off my physical TBR, and I feel so accomplished. The Song of Achilles is a Greek mythology reimagining / retelling, and it was pitched to me as a romance, and I feel like on Book Talk and online it is really pitched as this romance. In hindsight, I wish it wasn't pitched to me as that, and I wish it had been pitched as just a Greek mythology retelling, probably like just a work of fiction, because it is much more a tragedy in my opinion than a romance. And I think unfortunately going in with the expectations of it being a romance kind of did hinder my reading experience a little bit, because I was just expecting it to be a romance, and I just don't think that is the main point of this book. However, I did enjoy it. I was really intrigued to know what was going to happen to the characters and where the story was going to go. I gave this like 3.5 stars, so like decent rating, pretty good, enjoyed it, would recommend it to other people. However, my main issue with this book is that I just did not connect to the characters, and if you do not connect to the characters in a character-driven book, you're probably not going to have a fantastic time. And it's just as simple as that. In my reading vlog, I obviously talked about my thoughts on this and gave my criticisms, and I do understand that obviously this is a favorite book for so many people, and I had a lot of comments on that video of people basically trying to convince me to like this book more than I did. And I understand a lot of the thoughts and the things that they were saying, and they were all very valid, what they were saying, and kind of being like, oh, but it's not a romance, it should be a tragedy, you should have gone into it with that expectation. And obviously, unfortunately, I didn't. But even if I had gone in with the right expectations and the right Greek mythology knowledge, I just simply think at the end of the day I didn't connect to the characters, and it's just, you're not going to rate a book super highly if you don't connect to the characters, and it's a character driven book. And I also wish I liked this more than I did, and I'm really sorry for the people who were disappointed in my rating. I also don't think 3.5 stars is a bad rating, but that's another discussion. But obviously we all have different thoughts on different books, and like I said in that video, that is what makes reading so fun, is because we all have individual reading experiences, and me not being obsessed with a book does not diminish judge your experience reading a book. It just means we have different opinions, and I think that's okay. I also read Babel in that video, and I really enjoyed this way more than I thought I was going to. This is like a historical fantasy book. It has kind of that academia vibe to it. Some secret societies in this, lots of friendship, a bit of found family. It discusses colonialism, racism, class, sexism, a lot of really interesting topics, and I think it did it really well. I was very impressed by this, and I thoroughly enjoyed my reading experience. I gave this one 4.25 stars. I wasn't completely utterly obsessed, but I was definitely interested for the most part the whole time. I mean, there were some parts that were a bit slow to me, and this is not my normal genre. Like, I definitely wouldn't read a lot of books that kind of are in this same category, I guess, but I enjoyed myself a lot, and I would definitely recommend this one. I can completely understand if you are intimidated to read this, but I would really recommend just giving it a go, because when I actually started the book, it was way easier to comprehend than I originally thought it would be. So really enjoyed this one. Then we have the Invocations by Crystal Sutherland. This was a very interesting read for me. I think this is classified as like a YA fantasy horror, potentially. This was my book club's pick for this month, and I honestly don't think I would have picked it up unless it was a book club pick, because the idea of horror just doesn't really appeal to me, and I don't know if I've read many, if any, horrors in my time. And you know what? I was kind of right for thinking that, because this was completely and utterly not my vibe. I gave this one 3 stars because I really liked the characters and I really liked the writing. I think the writing was done so well, and the characters just felt very individual and unique, and you just knew who they were as people. Like, they were just written super well. Like, I just feel like I knew them, and I loved the way their personalities differed, but the way they all had this friendship and the way they like connected, I thought was done really well. However, the plot and the style of this book is just not for me. This is a book about demons and witches and spells and curses, and not in like a fun little fairy way, like in a dark, gruesome, let's describe wounds and dark things, you know? Like, it's not for me, and that's okay. Like, I just have discovered that this is not a genre that I want to continue to read, but sometimes you have to read a book to know if it's for you, and I just read it and realized it wasn't for me. Like I said, still 3 stars because I think it was a well-written book. I just know it wasn't for me, if that makes sense. I don't know, it's really interesting because I've read other books with some of these types of themes, kinda. Like, for example, The Mortal Instruments is a series by Cassandra Clare, and it's YA, and it's about like demon hunters, and for the most part it's just very adventurous and light and just like funny and just like a good time. And even though it's about like demon hunters, I would not call it dark. It just never felt uncomfortable for me to read that. This, however, the way they talk about witches and demons and things like that was just much too dark for me personally, and I cannot believe that this is YA. Like, that simply does not make any sense to me. Like, I don't think this should be in the YA section at all, because YA is what, like 12 plus? If I was 12 years old and reading this, I would have not been doing well. Like, I would have had so many nightmares, I think. I feel very conflicted by this because yes, I can see that it's a well-written book, but yeah, like I said, just not for me. Not my kind of book. And that's okay. Next, I picked up Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This is a novella that follows Powerless. I definitely recommend reading Powerless first before picking this up, but this was just so much fun. I absolutely loved this. This one follows a side character who we meet in Powerless, and it happens during the same timeline as Powerless. So while Powerless is happening and while you're following the main characters in Powerless, this story is happening at the same time with a side character. And I just thought it was so well done, especially for a novella. I wish it was like 400 pages because I definitely could have read 400 pages of this, but I just loved it. I love the story, love the characters. I gave it 4 stars. I would have given it 5 if it was a little bit longer and a bit more fleshed out, but obviously as a novella that's to be expected. So, and I just cannot wait for Reckless to come out, I think in July, because I feel like this novella goes to show that Lauren Roberts isn't like a one and done author. At least that's what I'm hoping. Like, I was like, what if Powerless was really good, but maybe it was just kind of like a one-hit wonder type of situation, because sometimes sometimes that's the case, but reading this, I'm just like, no. Her writing and the way she writes characters, the way she writes romance, it just hits. It just hits. I cannot wait to see what else she releases in the future. Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was so good. 5 stars. First 5-star of the month, but not the last. This is obviously Emily Henry's newest release, and in this book we are following Daphne and Miles, who have both been dumped by their partners because their partners have left them to be with each other. Crazy stuff. And because they've both been kind of left in the dirt, they decide to move in together because they both need somewhere to live. So they move in together, and it's obviously a very unlikely situation, but it just kind of goes from there. They build a friendship, and obviously there's a romance. There's a bit of a fake dating situation as well, which I really enjoyed. It was like the perfect amount of like pettiness, banter, romance, flirtiness. I just love the way Emily Henry writes. I think, yeah, banter specifically, she just does so well, and I loved watching these characters become friends as well as lovers. I talked about it a lot more in my reading vlog, which I'll link down below if you guys want to see like my experience reading this and my thoughts more in depth, but I just think this was done so well, and I loved every minute of it. Like, I really loved my reading experience, so this was an easy 5 stars for me. Then I picked up my second 5-star of the month. 2 5-star books back to back. Honestly unheard of. This is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, another one of my favorite authors of all time, and another new release. In this book we meet Justin and Emma, and the premise of this one is that Justin has this curse where he says that every time he dates someone and they break up, that person goes on to meet the love of their life straight away. Like, he is always the one before the one. And Emma hears about this and she's like, oh my gosh, I have the same curse. And they kind of have this discussion, and they're like, wait, what if we fake date and then fake break up? Because then whoever we go to date next will be our soulmate, because we'll cancel each other out because we both have this curse. So you're following them as they fake date, but obviously, as one would guess, feelings get involved. And it was perfect. It made me laugh, it made me cry. I feel like it was the perfect amount of like rom and com. I feel like both Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez write rom-coms so well, because they seem to be able to write incredible characters and incredible storylines with the perfect amount of funniness and just silliness, and they actually genuinely make me smile and laugh, which doesn't always happen in a rom-com. Like, sometimes they're a bit cheesy, a bit cringy, and I just don't find that in Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez books. Like, I feel like they're just like the perfect amount of everything. I loved the acts of service in this book. I loved watching them kind of just care for each other, and also like them catching feelings when they really were trying not to was just really entertaining. So I definitely recommend this. I will say though, if possible, I would really suggest reading Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, then Yours Truly, and then Just for the Summer. You don't need to, but I really think it makes your reading experience of this book specifically just a bit better, because there's a part of this that you will get to and it will not hit the same if you haven't read those other 2 books. So I hate to be that person that's like, oh, don't read this unless you read, but I do think it will make your reading experience better if you read those other 2 books first, because they're all linked. They're like interconnected standalones. But yeah, there was a part of this that I was just like, oh my gosh, this hits so much harder because I know the other stories, you know? Sorry if the angle changed. My card just got full. But the last book that I picked up was Where the Dark Stands Still. This is the art copy, so the actual cover looks a little bit different to this one. I'll put it on the screen if you guys want to see it. But this is a New Wish release. It is a YA fantasy, and it's about a girl called Liska. She has magic, but she lives in a world where magic is very like shunned. Like, magic is like bad. People don't want you to have magic, and she really doesn't want to have magic because she's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be an outcast in my town. And so she's hiding it, but something happens where it kind of gets out that she has magic. And so Liska runs into the woods because I don't know how to explain it, but there's something where she can get a wish, but in order to get this wish, she must spend a year serving this demon. He's described as a demon, but he's really just like a man. So she moves into this old like mansion, this old like manor, and she is basically being a servant for this guy for a year. So that's kind of the premise of the book. Very interesting premise, very intriguing, and I honestly quite enjoyed this. I think I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars. Again, I read this right after finishing 2 5-star reads, and I just think it would have hit better if I wasn't picking it up at that point in time, because I was just feeling super slumpy after finishing 2 5-star reads reads, like nothing was gonna hit like those books did. So I think anything I picked up wouldn't have been as good. I also listened to this one as an audiobook, and I actually think I would have enjoyed it more if I physically read it, because I just didn't love the audiobook. It kind of gave me the ick for the love interest, and that obviously kind of ruined that for me, because obviously if you get the ick of a love interest, you're not like rooting for them as much. And I think it was honestly just the voice that the narrator gave him, because it was like a woman doing a man's voice, but I just don't think it was done very well. So yeah, I just don't think I gave this book the right chance, unfortunately, so that's on me. I think maybe I would have rated it higher if I'd read it at a different time and maybe read it physically. So there's my thoughts on that one. But those are all of the books that I read in April. I would love to hear what your favorite book that you read in April is, because maybe I need to pick it up. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye.